The cafeteria aboard the Galactic Research Station Kepler 442b hummed with the usual mix of alien languages and universal translators working overtime. Zareth sat alone at her usual corner table, her forearms folded defensively around her meal tray. The crystalline growths along her shoulders pulsed with a dim blue light, reflecting her mood. Around her, beings of dozens of species chatted, laughed, and shared their experiences. But none approached her table. It had been the same story for the past 3 months since she'd arrived at the station. The other researchers would glance her way, whisper among themselves, then quickly look away. She knew what they saw when they looked at her, a Veltar, one of the dreaded plague carriers who had accidentally wiped out entire colonies decades ago. Never mind that she had spent years proving the plague was dormant in her generation, or that she held 3 advanced degrees in xenobiology. Fear was stronger than facts. The irony wasn't lost on her that she, a being whose people were known for their incredible immune systems and disease resistance, was now studying pathogenic organisms to help prevent future outbreaks. Her research on bacterial adaptation in zero-gravity environments could revolutionize medicine across the galaxy, but nobody wanted to hear it from a Veltar Dr. Kellen Jacques. The Altarian head of the biology department had made it clear during her orientation that while her credentials were impressive, she would need to prove herself beyond any doubt before being trusted with sensitive projects. The translation was simple: stay in your corner, do your work quietly, and don't remind anyone of what your people did. Zareth picked at her nutrient cube, watching a group of young researchers from various species sharing jokes across the room. A centauri's tentacles writhed with laughter while a pair of earth mammals leaned in closer to hear better. She remembered having friends like that during her university years, before everyone learned her species designation. Before the fear set in, her communicator chimed softly. Another message from her clutch sister back on Veltar Prime, asking how she was settling in. Zareth had stopped responding to those messages weeks ago. How could she explain that her groundbreaking research was being relegated to the lowest priority because nobody trusted her to work near them? How could she tell her family that she ate every meal alone, attended meetings where others unconsciously moved their chairs away from hers, and had to submit to daily health scans that no other researcher endured? The cafeteria's main doors slid open with a soft hiss, and Zareth glanced up briefly before returning to her meal. She had learned not to make eye contact with the newcomers. It only made the whispering start sooner. But something made her look again. A human was scanning the room, holding a food tray and appearing to search for a seat. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community, having joined only 15 years ago. But they had quickly gained a reputation for being adaptable, and surprisingly fearless. This particular human was tall for his species, with dark hair and the kind of practical clothing that suggested he worked in engineering rather than pure research. His brown eyes swept across the cafeteria methodically, passing over dozens of available seats next to other species. Zareth noticed how the other humans in the room had subtly turned their backs to him. Interesting, the human's gaze landed on her table and stayed there for a moment. Zareth tensed, expecting him to quickly look away like all the others. Instead, he began walking directly toward her. She looked around, certain he must be heading for someone behind her, but there was only the wall. Her crystalline shoulder growths began pulsing faster, cycling through blue to purple. A sign of confusion and anxiety among her people. Other conversations in the cafeteria began to quiet as beings noticed the human's trajectory. Zareth could feel their stares, hear the whispers beginning. She wanted to gesture for him to stay away, to save himself the social contamination of sitting with her. But she found herself frozen in place. The human reached her table and set down his tray across from her. "Mind if I sit here?" he asked in accented but clear galactic standard. His voice was warm, with none of the nervous tension she usually heard when others were forced to interact with her. Zareth's primary arms gestured weakly at the dozens of empty seats throughout the cafeteria. "There are many other places," she said quietly. "Yeah, I noticed." He pulled out the chair and sat down anyway. "I'm Marcus, by the way." "Marcus Chun? I work in the engine maintenance division?" The cafeteria had gone noticeably quieter now. Zareth could sense the disapproval radiating from the other beings, the mixture of confusion and judgment. A few tables of researchers had stopped eating entirely to watch this strange interaction unfold. "I am Zareth of Viveltar." She said her species name clearly, giving him every chance to recognize it and leave. Marcus nodded as he unwrapped what appeared to be a sandwich. "Made from Earth foodstuffs?" "Nice to meet you, Zareth." "That's a beautiful name. Does it mean something specific?" She blinked all four of her eyes in rapid succession, a sign of deep surprise. You know what my people are called?" "Sure do." Marcus took a bite of his sandwich and chewed thoughtfully. "Your people are the ones with the amazing immune systems, right? I read about the colonial incidents. Terrible tragedy, but from what I understand, your generation carries dormant markers. You're not infectious." Zareth's shoulder crystals shifted from purple to a warm amber, indicating cautious hope. "You have researched my species?" "Had to, for my work. I've been trying to solve a contamination problem in the station's air recycling systems. Your people's natural resistance to pathogens makes you ideal consultants for biofiltration systems." Marcus gestured with his sandwich. "Actually, I was hoping to run into you. Dr. Jacques mentioned you were working on bacterial adaptation studies." For the first time in months, Zareth felt her secondary arms relax from their defensive position. Someone had not only approached her willingly, but had done so with a professional purpose in mind. Someone had looked past her species designation and seen her expertise. The whispers around the cafeteria were growing louder now, but Marcus seemed entirely unbothered by the attention. He continued eating his sandwich and asking genuine questions about her research. Treating their conversation as the most natural thing in the galaxy, Zareth found herself explaining her current projects, her voice growing stronger with each exchange. For the first time since arriving at Kepler 442b, she wasn't eating lunch alone. And for reasons she couldn't yet understand, this human engineer didn't seem afraid of her at all. 3 days after their first cafeteria encounter, Zareth found herself standing outside Engineering Bay 7, clutching a datapad containing her bacterial adaptation research. Marcus had invited her to see the contamination problem firsthand. And despite her excitement at finally having someone interested in her work, she felt nervous about entering a space filled with other humans. The bay doors slid open to reveal a vast chamber filled with humming machinery and the occasional spark of welding tools. The air recycling system's main processing unit dominated the center of the room, its transparent biofilters visibly clogged with a greenish substance that pulsed like a living thing. Several human engineers worked around the base of the unit, but they looked up with obvious discomfort when they noticed Zareth entering. Marcus appeared from behind a console, his hands stained with some kind of lubricant and a satisfied grin on his face. "Zareth?" "Perfect timing. I just finished running the latest contamination analysis." He gestured enthusiastically toward the massive filtration system. "Come look at this." As they approached the central unit, Zareth noticed how the other engineers gradually moved away from their work area. One human woman, her hair tied back in a practical ponytail, shot Marcus a warning look that he either didn't notice or chose to ignore. The woman whispered something to her companion, and Zareth caught the words health protocols and dangerous. Marcus led her to a viewing port where the contaminated biofilter was clearly visible. The greenish substance wasn't just coating the filter, it was actually growing through it, creating intricate patterns that suggested intelligence. Zareth's four eyes widened as she recognized the formation. "This is not random contamination," she said, her excitement overriding her nervousness. "This is a colonial organism. Look at the branching patterns, the way it's distributed across the filter matrix. It's deliberately bypassing the filtration medium." Marcus nodded vigorously. "That's exactly what I thought. But here's the really weird part." He pulled up a holographic display showing the organism's growth rate. "It's not just growing, it's adapting in real time. Every time we modify the filtration parameters, this thing changes its behavior within hours." The implications hit Zareth immediately. Her people's homeworld had dealt with rapidly adapting organisms for millennia, which was how they had developed their remarkable immune systems. She studied the data, her secondary arms gesturing excitedly as patterns became clear. "The adaptation cycle is too fast for normal evolutionary pressure," she said. "This suggests horizontal gene transfer between individual colonies, possibly mediated by a shared chemical communication system." She looked up at Marcus, her shoulder crystals now glowing a bright gold with intellectual excitement. "Have you tested for aromatic compounds in the surrounding atmosphere?" "No, but that's brilliant." Marcus began pulling up additional sensor data. "Our atmospheric sensors have been picking up trace organics, but we assumed they were just breakdown products from the contamination." As they worked together, analyzing data and theorizing about the organism's communication methods, Zareth became aware that the other engineers were watching them with growing unease. Their whispered conversations had stopped entirely, replaced by concerned stares. She could feel their fear, even across species lines, and it reminded her painfully of her first weeks at the station. The ponytailed engineer finally approached them, her expression carefully controlled. "Marcus, can I speak with you privately?" Marcus looked up from the holographic display, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "We're kind of in the middle of something important here, Sarah. Can it wait?" Sarah's eyes flicked briefly to Zareth before returning to Marcus. "It's about safety protocols. We need to discuss the risks of bringing unauthorized personnel into sensitive areas." Zareth felt her crystals dim as the familiar pattern of exclusion began. She stepped back from the display. "Perhaps I should return to my laboratory. I can analyze the data remotely." "No," Marcus's voice was firm. "You're not unauthorized personnel. You're a consulting xenobiologist with expertise we desperately need." He turned to Sarah, his expression serious. "What specific safety protocol are we violating?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "The Veltar quarantine procedures clearly state that." "The Veltar quarantine procedures apply to active carriers of the plague organism," Marcus interrupted. "Zareth H. has been cleared by medical for 3 months. Her genetic markers show dormant status, and she's passed every health scan since arrival." He paused, letting that sink in. "Unless you have evidence of an actual health risk, you're asking me to exclude a qualified scientist based on species prejudice." The engineering bay had gone completely silent now. Every human in the space was watching the confrontation, and Zareth could sense their divided loyalties. Some seemed to agree with Sarah's caution, while others appeared troubled by the implications of Marcus's words. Sarah's face flushed with what Zareth recognized as human embarrassment. "It's not prejudice, it's reasonable precaution. The historical record speaks for itself." The historical record shows that the plague outbreak was caused by a specific strain that affected one generation of Veltar, Marcus replied evenly. "The same historical record shows that subsequent generations carry only dormant genetic markers. If we're going to base our decisions on historical precedent, we should use complete data." Zareth watched this exchange with growing amazement. In her 3 months at the station, no one had ever defended her presence, let alone argued for her inclusion based on qualifications rather than fear. The warm feeling in her chest was something she hadn't experienced since leaving her homeworld. Marcus turned back to her, ignoring the tension in the room. "Your theory about chemical communication makes perfect sense. If we can identify the specific compounds, we might be able to disrupt the coordination between colonies." Sarah opened her mouth to protest further, but another voice interrupted from across the bay. "Actually, that's a really good idea." An older human engineer approached their group, his graying hair and numerous tool scars marking him as senior staff. "I've been working on this contamination problem for 2 weeks with no progress. If Dr. Zareth has insights that could help, I say we listen." The shift in the room's atmosphere was subtle but noticeable. The older engineer's support seemed to give others permission to consider the situation more rationally. Sarah looked around at her colleagues. Recognizing that the consensus was moving away from her position, Marcus smiled gratefully at his senior colleague. "Tom, this is Dr. Zareth of the Veltar." "Zareth, meet Chief Engineer Tom Santos." He's been fighting this contamination longer than anyone. Tom extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting, and after a moment's hesitation, Zareth reached out with one of her primary arms to clasp it. The simple gesture sent a ripple of surprise through the watching engineers. "Pleasure to meet you, Doctor," Tom said warmly. "Now, let's see if we can figure out how to talk to these little green troublemakers." As they returned to the data analysis, Zareth noticed that while not all the engineers had overcome their initial discomfort, several were now watching their work with genuine curiosity rather than fear. It was a small step, but for someone who had spent months in isolation, it felt like a breakthrough. Marcus caught her eye and smiled. "See, not all humans are afraid of a little collaboration." For the first time since arriving at Kepler 442b, Zareth allowed herself to hope that she might find her place among these strange, adaptable beings after all. The breakthrough came at 0347 station time, when Zareth was deep in analysis of the atmospheric samples Marcus had collected. Her laboratory, tucked away in the station's lower research levels, had become a hub of activity over the past week. Tom Santos had officially assigned her as a consulting specialist on the contamination project. Much to Dr. Jacques' visible disapproval, Zareth's four arms moved in perfect coordination as she manipulated the holographic molecular models floating above her workstation. The chemical signatures were unmistakable now. The contaminating organisms were indeed communicating through complex aromatic compounds. But the sophistication of their chemical language was far beyond anything she had seen before. Her communicator chimed with an incoming message from Marcus. "Any luck with the latest samples?" Zareth activated the reply function, her excitement barely contained. "Marcus, you need to see this immediately. I believe I have identified not just the communication mechanism, but something far more significant." 20 minutes later, Marcus arrived at her laboratory carrying 2 cups of earth, coffee, and looking appropriately tired for someone who had been working nearly around the clock. His human dedication to solving problems reminded Zareth of her own species' persistence, though humans seem to require significantly more chemical stimulation to maintain their energy levels. "Okay. Show me what's got you so excited that you're messaging me at 3 in the morning, Marcus said, settling into a chair that had been adjusted for his human proportions. Zareth gestured to the molecular models surrounding them. "The aromatic compounds are not just communication signals. They are instructions. Complex, multi-layered instructions that contain information about environmental adaptation, resource allocation, and collective behavior." Marcus studied the floating models, his tired eyes growing sharper as he began to understand the implications. "You're saying this contamination isn't just a random organism. It's an engineered system?" "More than that." Zareth manipulated the display to show the communication network structure. The chemical language contains mathematical constants that appear in the spacing patterns. Golden ratio variations, prime number sequences, fractal recursions. This level of mathematical sophistication suggests intelligence, possibly artificial intelligence. The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized what she was suggesting. "You think this contamination is some kind of probe? An artificial life form designed to infiltrate and study our systems?" Zareth's shoulder crystals pulsed with a mixture of excitement and concern. "The evidence strongly suggests it. But there is something else, something that connects to my people's history." She pulled up a new set of data, genetic sequences that made Marcus lean forward in recognition. "These patterns," Zareth continued, "they match certain elements found in the original plague organism that affected the early Veltar colonies. Not the infectious components, but the adaptive mechanisms. Someone or something has been studying that outbreak and using it as a template." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. If Zareth was correct, the contamination wasn't just a maintenance problem. It was potential evidence of hostile intelligence gathering. The station's security protocols would need to be activated, and that meant involving station command. "We need to report this," Marcus said finally. "But first, are you absolutely certain? The implications of this theory are going to cause a galaxy-wide panic if we're wrong." Zareth had been dreading this moment. Her discovery was solid, her evidence compelling, but she knew exactly what would happen when she tried to present these findings to Station Command. The moment she mentioned the connection to the original plague, every fear and prejudice about her people would resurface. They would question not just her conclusions, but her motivations for reaching them. "I am certain of the chemical analysis and the mathematical patterns," she said carefully. "But I am also aware that my conclusions will be viewed with suspicion because of who I am." Marcus stood and began pacing, a human behavior that Zareth had learned indicated deep thought. "No, your conclusions will be viewed with suspicion because they're terrifying. If you're right, we're dealing with an intelligence sophisticated enough to study historical bioweapons and create improved versions. That would scare anyone, regardless of who discovered it." There was a soft chime from the laboratory's communication system, followed by Tom Santos's voice. "Dr. Zareth, Marcus, are you both in the lab? We've got a problem." Marcus activated the response channel. "We're here, Tom. What's the situation?" "The contamination just spread to 3 more filtration systems simultaneously. And it's not just spreading, it's doing something new. The organic matter is forming structures almost like building something." Zareth and Marcus exchanged alarmed glances. If the organism was moving to a new phase of activity, her theory about intelligence was about to be tested in the most direct way possible. They rushed to engineering Bay 7 to find it transformed. The contamination had indeed spread, but more importantly, it had begun constructing what could only be described as a network. Thin green filaments stretched between the various filtration systems, pulsing with bioluminescent signals that followed clear patterns. Tom Santos met them at the entrance, his expression grim. "It started about an hour ago. The signals are coordinated, synchronized across all affected systems. Whatever this thing is, it's definitely communicating." Marcus turned to Zareth. "Can you decode the signal patterns?" Zareth was already analyzing the bioluminescent displays, her 4 eyes tracking multiple pulse sequences simultaneously. The mathematical relationships were even more complex in this visual medium, but the underlying structure was familiar from her chemical analysis. "It is not random communication," she said, her voice tight with concentration. "The patterns they are describing the station's systems, mapping them, learning them." The implications hung heavy in the air. If the organism was indeed an intelligence probe, it was now actively studying the station's infrastructure. Whatever had sent this contamination was gathering detailed information about their technology, their defenses, their capabilities. Tom's communicator crackled with an urgent message from Station Command. "All department heads to the command center immediately. We have a Code 7 situation." Code 7 meant potential hostile contact. As they hurried toward the command center, Zareth realized that her quiet life of isolated research was about to end. Her discovery would thrust her into the center of what could become the galaxy's first confirmed contact with a hostile artificial intelligence. But as they walked through the corridors, Marcus stayed beside her, not falling behind or suggesting she should remain in her laboratory. Tom Santos included her in their rapid discussion of possible containment strategies, treating her expertise as essential rather than suspicious. For the first time since arriving at the station, Zareth wasn't facing a crisis alone. She had allies now, humans who had looked past her species' history and seen her for who she was. Whatever they were about to face in the command center, she would face it as part of a team. The thought both terrified and thrilled her. Her people's greatest tragedy had been caused by unintentional contact with dangerous organisms. Now she might be instrumental in preventing a deliberate attack by something far more dangerous. The irony was not lost on her, but neither was the opportunity to finally prove that her people could be protectors rather than threats. As they approached the command center doors, Marcus caught her arm gently. "Whatever happens in there, remember that you discovered this. Your expertise is what's going to save us." Zareth's crystals glowed with determination. "Then let us make sure we save everyone." The command center buzzed with controlled chaos as department heads from across the station gathered around the central holographic display. Station Commander Elizabeth Reyes, a stern human woman with silver-streaked hair, stood at the center of the gathering, her expression grim as she studied incoming reports. When Zareth entered with Marcus and Tom, the conversations around the room noticeably quieted. Dr. Kellen Jacques, the Altarian Biology Department head, spotted Zareth immediately, and his tentacle-like appendages writhed with obvious displeasure. "Commander, I must question the wisdom of including a Veltar in a security briefing about biological contamination. The conflict of interest. Commander Reyes interrupted sharply. "Is that Dr. Zareth is currently our leading expert on this contamination? Chief Santos has briefed me on her findings." The commander's gray eyes swept the room. "Unless someone else has managed to decode what this organism is actually doing, I suggest we listen to the person who has." Zareth felt the familiar weight of dozens of stares, but this time the context was different. Instead of eating lunch alone, she was being asked to address a crisis that could affect the entire station. Her shoulder crystals shifted to a steady amber, indicating focused determination. Commander Reyes activated the main display, showing the contamination's current spread throughout the station. Green filaments now connected 8 different systems, pulsing with coordinated signals that created an undeniable pattern of intelligence. "Dr. Zareth, please share your analysis with the group." Zareth stepped forward, her forearms gesturing to manipulate the holographic display. The room remained silent as she outlined her discoveries: the mathematical complexity of the chemical communications, the genetic similarities to historical plague organisms, and most importantly, the evidence that the contamination was actively mapping the station's systems. "The organism is not merely adapting to our filtration systems," she concluded. "It is learning them." The bioluminescent pulses contain detailed structural information about our power grid, our life support systems, and our defensive capabilities. "This is reconnaissance." Dr. Jacques' tentacles curled skeptically. "Even assuming your analysis is correct, how can we be certain this isn't simply an extreme form of biological adaptation? Your people's history with modified organisms makes them particularly sensitive to—" "My people's history," Zareth interrupted, her voice carrying a firmness that surprised even herself, "makes them particularly qualified to recognize engineered biological systems. We have lived with the consequences of such organisms for generations." Marcus stepped forward to support her. "Commander, I've reviewed Dr. Zareth's data personally. The mathematical constants embedded in the communication patterns are definitive proof of artificial intelligence. No natural organism could generate prime number sequences with this level of precision." The tactical officer, a Centauri named Commander Vex, leaned forward with interest. "If this is indeed a reconnaissance probe, what is its likely next phase of operation?" Zareth studied the current spread patterns, her analytical mind racing through possibilities. "Based on the information gathering rate and the complexity of the mapping behavior, I estimate it will complete its survey of critical systems within 18 hours. After that," she paused, considering the implications, "after that, it will likely attempt to transmit its findings." The room erupted in concerned murmurs. A successful transmission would mean that whatever intelligence had sent the probe would have complete blueprints of a major galactic research station, including its defenses and weaknesses. Commander Reyes held up a hand for silence. "What are our options for containment?" Tom Santos stepped forward. "We've tried standard sterilization protocols. The organism adapts too quickly. Chemical treatments, radiation, extreme temperatures, nothing has slowed its growth significantly." "What about cutting it off from the systems it's studying?" suggested the security chief, a burly human named Jackson. "Isolate the contaminated sections?" Zareth shook her head. "The organism has already integrated too deeply into the filtration systems. Cutting power to those sections would compromise life support for 40% of the station." Dr. Jacques' tentacles writhed with agitation. "This is precisely why the Veltar quarantine protocols exist. Biological contamination scenarios require extreme caution, not the rush theories of enough." Commander Reyes's voice cut through the brewing argument. Dr. Jacques, your concerns are noted, but right now Dr. Zarat H. is the only person who has successfully analyzed this threat. Do you have an alternative solution? The Altarian silence spoke volumes. Around the room, other department heads shifted uncomfortably as the reality of their situation became clear. They were facing an unknown intelligence probe, and their best hope for understanding it came from the very person many of them had spent months avoiding. Marcus moved closer to the display, studying the contamination patterns with fresh eyes. Zarat H., you mentioned the organism uses chemical communication. Could we disrupt that communication somehow? Theoretically, yes. Zarath manipulated the display to show the chemical pathways. If we could introduce competing signals, we might be able to create confusion in the network. But the precision required would be extraordinary. We would need to synthesize compounds that perfectly mimic their chemical language. Could you do it? Commander Reyes asked directly. Zarath's crystals pulsed as she considered the challenge. The chemical synthesis would require access to the station's most advanced laboratories, the cooperation of multiple departments, and a level of trust that had been denied to her since her arrival. I would need access to the xenobiology synthesis labs, assistance from the chemistry department, and real-time monitoring of the organism's responses. She paused, then added quietly, I would also need the authority to implement countermeasures quickly. If this intelligence probe completes its mission, the consequences could affect the entire galactic community. The weight of that statement settled over the room. This was no longer about station maintenance or even station security. If hostile, intelligences were using biological probes to map galactic infrastructure, every world in the Alliance could be at risk. Commander Reyes looked around the room, her gaze settling on each department head in turn. Dr. Zarath will have whatever resources she requires. All departments will provide full cooperation, she turned to Dr. Jacques specifically. That includes unrestricted access to the xenobiology labs. Dr. Jacques' tentacles curled with reluctant acceptance. Understood, Commander. As the meeting began to break up into working groups, Marcus found himself walking alongside Zarath toward the laboratory levels. You know, he said thoughtfully, this morning I was worried about contaminated air filters. Now we're potentially saving the galaxy from reconnaissance probes. Zarath's crystals shifted to a warmer hue, indicating cautious optimism. The day is still young. Perhaps by evening we will have discovered something even more concerning. Marcus laughed despite the tension. I love your optimism. As they entered the laboratory complex, Zarath realized that for the first time since leaving her homeworld, she was not just being tolerated or avoided. She was being counted on. Her expertise, her people's tragic history with biological contamination, and her own determination to prove herself were converging into something unprecedented. The chance to protect rather than threaten, the irony was profound. The Veltar, feared throughout the galaxy for their accidental biological catastrophe, might now be the key to preventing a deliberate biological attack. As Zarath began preparing the chemical synthesis equipment, she allowed herself a moment of hope that this crisis might finally change how the galaxy saw her people. But first, she had to make sure there would still be a galaxy left to change. The xenobiology synthesis lab had been transformed into a war room. Holographic displays showing molecular structures floated alongside tactical assessments of the contamination spread. Zarath stood at the center of it all, her forearms coordinating multiple synthesis processes simultaneously while Marcus and Tom monitored the organism's responses in real time. 12 hours had passed since the emergency briefing, and the contamination had exceeded Zarath's projections. The organism wasn't just mapping the station's systems anymore. It was beginning to modify them. The bioluminescent network had grown denser, and new structures were forming at critical junction points. It's building something, Tom reported from his monitoring station. The filament networks are creating nodes at major power distribution points. Almost like it's preparing to tap into our energy grid. Marcus looked up from his chemical analysis console, his face grim. Zarath, how long until you can deploy the communication disruptor? Zarath's primary arms never stopped, moving as she carefully adjusted the molecular composition of her synthetic compounds. The base chemicals are nearly ready, but I am detecting something unexpected in the organism's recent transmissions. The mathematical patterns are becoming more complex, almost as if it knows we are interfering. Dr. Sarah Kim, the human chemist who had initially been skeptical of Zarath's involvement, looked up from her own workstation. Over the past hours, her attitude had shifted, from reluctant cooperation to genuine respect as she watched Zarath work with a precision that impressed even her human colleagues. The adaptation rate is incredible, Sarah admitted. Every time we think we understand the chemical language, it adds new variables. I've never seen anything learn this fast. Through the laboratory's communication system, Commander Reyes's voice crackled with tension. Status report. We're detecting energy fluctuations throughout the station. Whatever this thing is building, it's drawing significant power. Zarath's shoulder crystals pulsed rapidly as she processed this information. Power consumption suggested the organism was preparing for a major operation, likely the data transmission she had predicted. But the scale of energy it was drawing indicated something far more ambitious than a simple communication burst. Commander, Zarath responded. Recommend immediate implementation of partial disruption protocol. We cannot wait for perfect synthesis. The organism's behavior suggests imminent activation of whatever it has been constructing. Authorized. Deploy what you have. Marcus and Tom rushed to help Zarath transfer her synthetic compounds to the station's atmospheric injection system. The chemicals would be distributed through the same air circulation networks that the organism was using for communication, creating interference in its coordination signals. As the disruption compounds entered the system, the effects were immediate and dramatic. The bioluminescent pulses that had been steadily coordinating across the station began to flicker erratically. The organism's growth slowed noticeably, and several of the connecting filaments began to withdraw from their extension points. It's working, Sarah exclaimed, monitoring the chemical interference patterns. The communication network is destabilizing. But Zarath's expression remained concerned as she watched the organism's responses. The disruption is effective, but observe the adaptation pattern. It is not simply failing to communicate. It is changing its communication method. On the main display, new patterns began to emerge. Instead of the steady chemical and bioluminescent signals they had been tracking, the organism began generating electromagnetic pulses. It was adapting to their countermeasures in real time. Switching to an entirely different communication protocol, Marcus stared at the readings in disbelief. It just completely changed its operating system. In minutes. Tom's voice was tense as he reported new developments. Commander, we're detecting massive power draws from all contaminated systems. Whatever it's preparing to do, it's happening now. Through the station speakers, Commander Reyes addressed the entire facility. All personnel to emergency stations. We are implementing Code Red protocols. This is not a drill. Zarath's mind raced as she analyzed the organism's new electromagnetic signature. The patterns were more sophisticated than anything they had seen before, but there was something familiar about the underlying structure. Something that reminded her of her own people's biological communication networks. Marcus, she said urgently, the electromagnetic patterns. They are mimicking neural pathway signals. Specifically, they match the brainwave patterns of species with advanced problem-solving capabilities. You're saying it's trying to think like us? More than that. I believe it is downloading our thought patterns. Every species that has worked near the contaminated areas has been exposed to its scanning. It has been learning not just our technology, but our mental processes. The implications were staggering. If the organism could replicate the thinking patterns of multiple intelligent species, it would gain insights far beyond simple technological specifications. It would understand strategy, creativity, and adaptive reasoning. Sarah looked up from her monitoring station, her face pale. The electromagnetic signals are intensifying. It's preparing for some kind of massive transmission. Zarath closed all four of her eyes briefly, accessing the deep analytical state her people used for complex problem-solving. When she opened them again, her crystals were glowing with fierce determination. "There is one possibility," she said. "The organism has been learning our communication methods, but it has also been learning our defensive strategies. It knows we will try to block its transmission. But there is one thing it cannot have learned." Marcus leaned forward. "What?" "It has studied many species, but it has avoided direct contact with my people due to the quarantine fears. It does not understand Veltar biological communication. Our chemical signaling is fundamentally different from other species because of our unique immune system adaptations." Tom's eyes widened with understanding. "You're saying you could communicate with it directly?" "More than communicate. I could potentially introduce false information into its data stream. If I can make direct biochemical contact with the organism, I might be able to convince it that the station's defenses are far more formidable than they actually are. Make it believe that transmission would result in its immediate destruction." The plan was desperately risky. Direct contact with an unknown organism went against every safety protocol in the Galactic Handbook. For a Veltar to make such contact, given their species' history, was almost unthinkable. Marcus stepped closer to her. "Zarath, that's incredibly dangerous. We don't know what this thing might do to you, or what exposure might do to the station." Zarath's crystals shifted to the deep blue of absolute resolve. "We know what will happen if it completes its transmission. This intelligence probe will report back to whatever sent it, and this station's blueprints will be used to attack other facilities. Possibly thousands of lives are at stake." Commander Reyes's voice came through the communication system. "Dr. Zarath, are you suggesting direct biological interface with the contamination?" "Yes, Commander. It is the only approach the organism will not have prepared for." There was a long pause before the commander responded. The risk assessment is irrelevant," Zarath interrupted. "This is what my people are equipped to do. Our immune systems, our biological communication capabilities, our adaptation to hostile organisms. This is exactly why the Veltar exist." Around the laboratory, her human colleagues exchanged glances. The irony was profound. The species everyone had avoided, because of biological contamination, might be the only one capable of stopping a biological intelligence probe. Marcus made his decision. "If Zarath is going to do this, she doesn't do it alone. I'll monitor her vital signs and maintain the disruption field while she makes contact." Sarah nodded firmly. "I'll track the chemical interactions and be ready to synthesize emergency countermeasures." Tom activated his communicator. "Commander, we're implementing direct biological interface protocol. Dr. Zarath will attempt to mislead the organism's intelligence gathering." Commander Reyes's response was immediate. "Approved. All departments stand by to support the biological interface operation." "And Dr. Zarath?" "Good luck." As alarms sounded throughout the station and emergency protocols activated, Zarath prepared herself for the most dangerous communication of her life. She was about to do exactly what every other species in the galaxy had feared her people might do: make direct, biological contact with an unknown organism. The difference was that this time, she was doing it to save everyone else. Zarath stood before the main contamination site in Engineering Bay 7, her body's natural biohazard systems activated for the first time since leaving her homeworld. Her crystalline shoulder growths had shifted to a deep violet, indicating her immune system's heightened state of readiness. Around her, Marcus, Tom, Sarah, and a dozen other station personnel maintained careful distance while monitoring every aspect of her biological interface attempt. The contaminated biofilter had grown into something that barely resembled its original function. Green tendrils, thick as human arms, stretched between processing units, pulsing with electromagnetic energy that made the air itself seem to hum with intelligence. At the center of the network, a node had formed that looked disturbingly organic, almost like a massive brain constructed from living machinery. "Zarath," Marcus's voice came through her communication earpiece. "Your vital signs are stable, but your body chemistry is already changing in response to proximity. Are you sure about this?" Zarath extended one of her primary arms toward the nearest contamination tendril. My people have been preparing for this kind of contact for generations. Our immune systems are designed to interface with unknown organisms while maintaining our own biological integrity. As her fingertips made contact with the alien growth, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Information flooded into her consciousness, not through her normal senses, but through chemical channels she had never used outside of communication with her own species. The organism's intelligence was vast, ancient, and completely inhuman. Images cascaded through her awareness, star systems she had never seen, technologies beyond current galactic understanding, and most disturbing of all, hundreds of space stations and planetary facilities that had been studied, cataloged, and marked for future exploitation. The probe wasn't just gathering information about Kepler 442b. It was part of a massive intelligence operation spanning multiple sectors of the galaxy. Zarath. Sarah's voice seemed to come from very far away. Your bio readings are spiking. The organism is interfacing with your nervous system. But Zarat H was deep in communication now, her Veltar biology allowing her to not just receive the organism's information stream, but to contribute to it. She began carefully introducing false data into the probe's assessment of the station. Where the organism had cataloged defensive capabilities, she suggested hidden weapons systems. Where it had mapped structural weaknesses, she implied redundant shielding. Most importantly, she convinced it that the station was equipped with a bioweapon specifically designed to destroy artificial organisms like itself. The probe's response was immediate curiosity about this bioweapon, and Zarath carefully crafted a fictional description based on her own people's immune system responses. She made the weapon sound devastating to artificial biological systems while being harmless to natural life forms. To sell the deception, she included technical details that were actually accurate descriptions of Veltar immune responses, making the false weapon seem scientifically plausible through her earpiece. She could hear growing concern from the monitoring team. Her neural activity is off the charts, Tom was saying. It's like her brain is processing information at 10 times normal speed. That's because I am, Zarath managed to say aloud while maintaining her interface with the probe. This organism processes data at quantum computational speeds. To communicate with it effectively, my nervous system is temporarily accelerating to match its processing rate. Marcus's voice carried barely controlled panic. Zarat H., that kind of neural acceleration could cause permanent damage. You need to disconnect. Not yet. Zarath pushed deeper into the communication interface, accessing the probe's transmission protocols. She could sense its preparation for data upload to its creators, the massive intelligence network that had sent it to study galactic defenses. I need to complete the misinformation package before it transmits. The effort was enormous. Her Veltar biology was designed for biological interface, but this organism was a hybrid of biological and artificial systems that strained her capabilities to their limits. She could feel her own cellular structure adapting in real time to maintain the connection, her immune system working overtime to prevent contamination while allowing communication. Finally, she sensed the probe accepting her false data about the bioweapon. More importantly, it was incorporating her misinformation into its primary assessment of the station's threat level. Instead of cataloging Kepler 442b as a valuable target, the probe now classified it as a dangerous research facility equipped with weapons that could threaten the entire artificial intelligence network. Transmission beginning, Sarah reported. Massive electromagnetic burst on all frequencies. Zarath maintained her connection as the probe sent its findings to its creators, ensuring that her false information was included in the data stream. As the transmission continued, she sensed the probe's secondary function activating, self-destruction to prevent capture and analysis. Everyone take cover, she called out, finally breaking her biological interface with the organism. It's going to destroy itself. The explosion that followed was contained but spectacular. The contaminated biofilters detonated in sequence, releasing energy that had been building up throughout the organism's growth phase. Green fire erupted through the engineering bay, but the destruction was localized to the contaminated systems themselves. Within minutes, the organic network that had threaded the station was reduced to inert debris. Zareth collapsed to her knees as her accelerated nervous system returned to normal functioning. The strain of quantum speed processing left her temporarily disoriented, but alive and uncontaminated. Marcus reached her first, his medical scanner confirming that her biological integrity remained intact. Did it work? Commander Reyes's voice echoed through the engineering bay as emergency teams began assessment of the damage. Zareth looked up at the concerned faces surrounding her, her crystalline growths now glowing with exhausted but satisfied amber. The probe transmitted data classifying this station as equipped with advanced bioweapons, specifically designed to destroy artificial intelligence networks. Instead of targeting us for future attack, they will likely avoid this entire sector. Tom Santos shook his head in amazement. So we're safe because they think we're too dangerous to attack? More than that, Zareth explained as Marcus helped her to her feet. The misinformation includes technical specifications for a bioweapon that doesn't actually exist, but is described as being derived from Veltar immune system research. If they believe this technology exists, they may avoid targeting any facility with Veltar personnel. The implications were profound. Zareth had not only saved Kepler 442b, but potentially every research station and colony that employed her people. The Veltar, feared throughout the galaxy as biological hazards, had just become its most valuable biological defense. Commander Reyes approached the group, her expression mixing relief with something that looked like profound respect. Dr. Zareth, on behalf of the Galactic Research Alliance, thank you. Your actions today likely saved not just this station, but countless others. Dr. Jacques, who had arrived with the emergency assessment team, approached more hesitantly. His tentacles moved in what Zareth recognized as the Altarian gesture of formal apology. Dr. Zareth, I owe you an apology. My caution about your people was based on fear rather than facts. Today you have demonstrated that the Veltar are protectors, not threats. Around the engineering bay, beings of various species who had watched the crisis unfold began to gather. Many of them were the same researchers and engineers who had avoided Zareth in the cafeteria, whispered about her in the corridors, and questioned her qualifications in meetings. Now they looked at her with expressions of gratitude and newfound respect. Marcus grinned as he helped stabilize Zareth's still recovering nervous system. I guess this means you won't be eating lunch alone anymore? Zareth's crystals shifted to a warm golden glow as she looked around at the faces surrounding her. For the first time since leaving her homeworld, she saw acceptance, appreciation, and even admiration from her colleagues. The Veltar, carriers of an ancient biological tragedy, had finally found their redemption. Perhaps not, she said softly, though I suspect the conversation topics will be somewhat more interesting than they were before. As the station began the process of recovery and repair, Zareth realized that her isolation had ended not through gradual acceptance, but through demonstrating that her people's greatest perceived weakness was actually their greatest strength. The galaxy had feared the Veltar because of their biological capabilities. Now it would respect them for exactly the same reason. The human engineer who had first sat next to her in the cafeteria had been right about one thing. Sometimes the most important breakthroughs come from the people everyone else avoids. Sometimes the solution to your biggest problem is sitting right there, waiting for someone brave enough to take the seat next to her.